Can you hear me? Oh. Yeah. Hi, my name is Amy Wibowo, and I'm a software engineer at Airbnb. And today, I'm going to talk to you about knitting. Now, before you get up to leave because you think that you're at the wrong conference, I promise that this is a talk about problem solving, hardware hacking, and will also contain some Ruby code. You're just going to have to wait to see how. So all stories start with an inspiration, and here's mine. A couple years ago, the video game review website Kotaku published an article about Super Nintendo add-ons that never made it. You've probably seen some of the more outlandish Nintendo peripherals that did make it, like a baseball bat for baseball video games, a golf club for golf video games, and a sniper rifle. But you might not have known that Nintendo had plans to make a knitting add-on for the Super Nintendo. So this add-on, the interface would be similar to Mario Paint, but the drawings that you made would have output on the knitting machine as scarves or socks or gloves. So this shown here is a proposed advertisement for the knitting add-on. And I'm not sure if you can see in the corner, but it even comes with a terrible pun. It says, "Why needle the competition?" So most comments left on this article were like, "Lols, we can totally understand why this add-on never made it. Who would use this?" But I had a totally different reaction to this article. And that was of being really, really sad. And I was completely heartbroken. I really wanted this to exist. And I felt like I would use it all the time if it did. So after this, I did a lot of research. Had Nintendo made any prototypes that they sold of this knitting machine? Did anyone else make an electronic knitting machine that I could hack somehow to do this? So after a lot of research, it turned out that some companies had made knitting machines in the 80s that you could use in your home, but they were largely discontinued. And somehow, I found one on Craigslist an hour-and-a-half drive away. It was really old, and a bunch of the parts were missing, but it was a start. It was the start of my dream. And to reiterate, here is my dream in cartoon form. I wanted a way to be able to take images, to send them to the knitting machine, and to turn them into sweaters, because I really wanted sweaters with Grumpy Cat and Doge on them. So now that I had this knitting machine, step one towards my dream was to learn how to operate the damn thing. Because this is what a knitting machine looks like. It has 200 needles that move. It has a way to thread up to 2 different kinds of yarn. And if this is what a knitting machine looks like, this is what using a knitting machine feels like. It came with a giant manual with words that I didn't understand. It had lots of moving parts. It beeped a lot of the time, which made me worried that I had pressed something wrong. And I was horribly afraid that if I did press something wrong, that this would happen, or at least that something on the machine would break and I would have no idea how to fix it. But thankfully, I had a knitting team to help me that was fearless and inventive. So a group of Airbnb engineers volunteered to help with this project at the Airbnb hackathon. So Airbnb has hackathons every summer and winter. And what does this have to do with travel, you might ask? So I asked the hackathon organizer if this was a valid project to work on during the hackathon, and he said, well, the hackathon is about creating awesome things, and our culture is also about being awesome, so thumbs up. So somehow I got permission to work on this project as part of the Airbnb hackathon. The engineers that had volunteered to help with this included an iOS engineer, an SRE engineer, a performance engineer, a data infrastructure engineer, a front engineer, and this is all to say that we were a bunch of engineers that had no idea about anything about knitting, let alone machine knitting. But I actually think that this was one of the best teams I've ever worked on, and it was actually a positive that no one knew anything about machine knitting, because it meant that no one had any ego invested in this project. They just wanted to make it work and didn't care about being right. It was just kind of an adventure that we were all in together. So the reason that it was important that our team was fearless and inventive was that the knitting machine was a really daunting project. It was something that none of us knew anything about. And it was technology from the 80s, and we were using a machine that had a lot of missing parts. So a lot of times we had to MacGyver replacing parts. But the good thing about being an engineer is that you can apply those problem-solving skills to anything, including knitting, it turns out. So one example of a problem that we had to be good engineers to solve was, for the knitting machine, you need to have yarn input automatically, and the yarn that you buy at like a craft store or yarn store is optimized for hand knitting, not for machine knitting. So our machine also came with a contraption that would convert store yarn into the spools of yarn that we needed to feed into the machine smoothly. But that contraption was also missing parts, and we had to MacGyver replacement parts from coffee cups. So this is a video of Dave, one of our engineers, using our contraption that we had made from a coffee cup to spool yarn. So after we had successfully knitted rows of solid color plain stitches, the next thing that we wanted to do was learn to use the machine's built-in patterns. So I mentioned earlier that the machine took up to 2 colors of yarn, and indicating which color of yarn was on a needle at any point in time is how you could make different patterns knit. And the machine came with a couple of built-in ones, and we wanted to be able to know how to make those patterns work before attempting our own patterns. And even though this was something that was still already built into the machine and not any of our own functionality, it felt like the next level of difficulty in machine knitting. It required like another 10 pages of the manual. It required a bunch of steps to set up that you didn't have to do previously. And just to illustrate how non-trivial this step was, on the left is our first attempt to knit a built-in pattern, and on the right is our first successful attempt a couple hours later. The first failures were a result of like pushing the wrong settings, having the wrong width of yarn, and accidentally using every other needle instead of every needle. But after we had successfully knit a built-in pattern, we still hadn't accomplished our goal, because as far as we could tell, the intended users of this knitting machine were grandmas, and so all the built-in patterns were things like bows and teddy bears and roses. And I don't know about you, but I would rather have Grumpy Cat on a sweater than a teddy bear. So we still wanted to make the machine take our own patterns. And we would split the step up into several other steps. So because the knitting machine was from the 80s, it used to take additional patterns via a floppy drive. And so we had the idea of emulating a floppy drive and putting our own images on this fake floppy drive and sending them to the machine that way. So we found a script that emulated a floppy drive, and we found some documentation that showed the custom pinout for the serial port of the knitting machine, because it was a strange pinout, so we had to make this cable ourselves. And then after that, the file format that the knitting machine took was a 2-bit bitmap. So we found a script that would convert images to 2-bit bitmaps before we sent them to the fake floppy drive. So this is the example of the first thing that we successfully knitted our own pattern from on the machine. And we also knit this Grumpy Cat. So now we are having entirely too much fun sending the machine our images. But we didn't want only us who had studied the machine and learned how it worked to be able to send images to the knitting machine. We wanted everyone in the office to be able to do this. So then the next step was to make the knitting machine image upload available on the web. And the interface would be simple. We would have a form where you could upload an image, and then you could press the knit button, and that would send the image to the machine and also return to you steps for what buttons to press on the machine to knit your pattern. And I have a video of the entire process in action. And closer up if you couldn't see. So now it's time to look at some code. So you can see that there is a view that has an upload form, and the upload action is really simple. First it saves the user uploaded photo, then it converts it to a 1-bit bitmap, and then it turns on the floppy drive emulator and sends it to the knitting machine, and shows you which buttons that you should press on the machine to start knitting it. Okay, so learnings. So what we learned from this adventure, besides gaining a huge amount of respect for grandmothers and anyone who hand knits, because that shit is hard. One learning is that teams work really well when no one has any ego involved and isn't trying to prove that their way is better, and they're just excited about what they're working on and want their project to succeed. Another learning is that it's really enjoyable to apply Ruby to any of your hobbies, no matter how unrelated they seem, especially hobbies that involve creating. And I challenge you to find a hobby that is more unrelated to Ruby than knitting. But even with knitting, it was possible. And also that it feels really great to take up something that you have no idea about. It's really humbling and it's challenging and it's refreshing, and it reminds you what it is like to feel like a beginner, which I think is really important. So there's still a lot that could be done in this whole area space. In the knitting axis, it would be amazing to learn how to use the machine better to be able to knit whole garments, like socks and sweaters and socks with toes. On the web interface axis, it would be amazing to have an interface where you could draw and have that drawing sent to the machine. And on the hardware hacking axis, it would be really great to figure out how to automate more of the knitting process, like to build a robotic arm that would move the manual parts back and forth for you, or to replace the brains of the knitting machine with an Arduino so that you can control the button presses, and that also doesn't have to be automatic. So I would love to talk to you if you care about combining code and craft, or if you care about hardware hacking, or if you care about knitting. And thank you so much for listening.
Is there any questions for Amy? I have a question. Does the knitting magic only take 2 colors?
It only takes 2 colors with all of the original parts. There's an add-on that you can buy to have it take up to 4 colors.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.